Though often dismissed as disorganized rabble by the generals of New Antioch and the heretic Sherriff, years of bitter warfare and painful lessons learned on the front lines have moulded the Trench Pilgrims into a surprisingly effective fighting force in the Great War. People come from all over fateful lands and beyond to join the Trench Pilgrims, each carrying whatever burden of guilt or zeal led them to their fateful decision. Many seek atonement from real or perceived transgressions against God. Others wish to practice the mortification of the flesh, seeking to deaden their sinful flesh in the pain and suffering of war to achieve sanctification. The Church does not condone or officially recognize the doctrines of the pilgrim processions. Many of its leading theologians consider the Trench Pilgrims' brand of faith a heterodoxy, and officially condemn the preachings of its prophets. Yet little is done to curb the widespread popularity of the Trench Pilgrim movement, as its fury is mainly directed at the servants of hell. Many scholars also suspect that certain fiery orators and charismatic leaders who might otherwise have caused great civil unrest find their home and their grave in the ranks of the Trench Pilgrims, saving the church or secular authorities the trouble of persecuting them. New aspirants arrive daily at the camps and bases of the pilgrim processions. As their very first act, they must turn over all their worldly possessions, from monies to land, rents, and valuables, to the elders of the pilgrimage, for the Great War's voracious appetite for funds is unending. This is not the only source of income for the Trench Pilgrims. Families of those who have joined often support their loved ones with material donations, and in some areas, the Trench Pilgrims claim the Peter's pence for themselves, much to the chagrin of the local church authorities. Next, the Castigators are quick to sort the new recruits into roles where their skills can bring maximum benefit to the entire congregation. Those with military training, especially if they have served in the front lines, are put to work in drilling new recruits. Those with technical expertise tend to the armaments of the war pilgrimage, while the few scientists who have become so drunk from the cup of the Lord that they have cast away their academic lives are sent to work in war laboratories hidden in no man's land. The Trench Pilgrims waste no skill, talent, or strength that can be put to use in service of the procession. Some are considered so sinful that they are not permitted to become Trench Pilgrims. Instead, they are condemned to become ecclesiastic prisoners, who must seek atonement on the battlefield without weapons, their hands bound with spiked silas, with their one hope for salvation found in self-sacrifice through detonation of explosives blessed by the war prophets. Arming their multitudinous followers is no mean task for the war prophets. Civilian firearms from shotguns to blunderbusses are put to quick use. Massive punt guns, hunting shotguns usually affixed to boats, are used as heavy weapon support, despite being extremely dangerous to fire for their wielders. Those who have served in the armies of the faithful before and purchased their service bolt-action rifle, as is the right of those who have completed their 7-year tour of duty, bring their arms along with their faith when they join. Trench Pilgrims readily engage in black market trading to gain access to restricted military hardware. Machine guns, automatic pistols, and submachine guns are all prized and much desired, though difficult to acquire. Ammunition, martyrdom pills, and explosives are also eagerly sought after by the Trench Pilgrim leaders. Mechanical components to repair and maintain the venerated anchorite shrines are extraordinarily expensive, but their care is seen as a secret duty. But above all, Trench Pilgrims value discarded samples of Metachrist flesh and blood, as well as chemical compounds smuggled from the Sultanate's great houses of learning. Creation of the Communicants is the highest priority to most pilgrim processions, both for their value on the battlefield, as well as for the religious vindication their creation brings in the eyes of the Trench Pilgrims. When the fences of no man's land can't provide what they need, or when coin is in short supply, the Trench Pilgrims turn to other means. Scavenging the battlefields for weapons, armour, supplies and valuables is a routine practice. Some of the most zealous warbands make bold raids to the ammo depots and arms caches of New Antioch and the Sultanate, though most are content to strip the fallen of their gear and collect artillery shells for their explosives. In their makeshift laboratories and chemical workshops, the Trench Pilgrims with some academic training experiment with the dosages and other additive substances to create communicants. Most such attempts end in the agonizing death of the would-be communicant, but new volunteers are never in short supply. Such underground testing sites also produce Molotov cocktails, a recipe devised by Finnish Trench Pilgrims to fight the ice demons of the north, charges for anti-tank hammers, and explosive devices for the ecclesiastic prisoners. In the lands of the Holy Roman Empire, peasants are not allowed to carry arms of any kind. There, the lowborn have turned to using war crosses, metal projectiles in the shape of a crucifix. Trench pilgrims ceaselessly train with these weapons, and some have attained such accuracy with them that it borders on supernatural. These war crosses, though primitive, have proven to be almost as effective as grenades and firearms. Lacking the heavy artillery support of either the forces of New Antioch or the heretic legions, the Trench Pilgrims have mastered the art of keeping their enemy close, where the advantage of sophisticated firearms their foes usually enjoy does not come into play. This turns the balance of power around, for in the fierce, brutal and bloody melee fought with trench club, pistol, blade and sheer ferocity, the Trench Pilgrims have few equals. While most regular troops of the faithful understandably dread closing in on the horrors of the Path of the Beast, or the undead slaves of the cult of the Black Grail, the Trench Pilgrims are inured against the supernatural fear that surrounds them, thanks to their famed iron capirots, whose shape and decorations follow the sacred geometry devised by Saint Hubert. A Trench Pilgrim will charge into combat against the dreadful monstrosity of Beelzebub with battle hymns on their lips, even though it spells almost certain doom. So the latest lore drop has us learning more about the Trench Pilgrims and how it is they go about prosecuting their war. As they are called to the front lines by the Lord, they drop whatever their past lives were and they go off and they start fighting. Now, we still don't have a tremendous amount of information about how they fall into the different processions. I'm assuming it's kind of by chance. They will be walking along, heading towards the no man's land, heading towards wherever it is that they're supposed to be going, and they will happen upon a procession that will appeal to them, whose religious fervour and views will match their own, and they will join up that way. But basically we learn that everybody has a job, everybody has a thing that they need to be doing, and that won't always be on the front lines in the Trench Pilgrims. You know, some of these guys are smart, scientifically, academically minded, and they'll be sent off to these laboratories where they mess around with very hard to get samples of the Metachrist flesh and work on the communicant process. Now, I spoke to Tuomas about that one in particular, about those labs and if they had ever kind of produced any earth-shattering or groundbreaking innovations, and he told me that those labs, because they're so kind of like underfunded and resources are hard to come by, their breakthroughs have normally been in efficiency, how to do a lot with a little, and that's what they tend to focus in on, and that they're actually quite good at that. So I just thought that was pretty interesting, and I would drop the knowledge in here. So there's a couple of words in here that might cause some curiosity amongst people as to what they actually mean. The first one, though often dismissed as disorganized rabble by the generals of New Antioch and the heretic Serenim. So I didn't know what Serenim meant, so I went and I looked it up, and it's actually a Hebrew biblical term, the plural of Seren, meaning lords or rulers, and can often be extrapolated as meaning tyrants. So basically the heretic lords, essentially, is what that means. I thought it was interesting, maybe I'm reading too much into this, that they would choose a Hebrew word there. And maybe it's a little indicator that we might be getting some information on the Hebrew Knights at some point. Possibly, who knows? Potentially just incredible cope from me. But it is what it is. So that was the first word that kind of caused some interest for me. The second one was a pronunciation nightmare that I had to look up. Silas. Silas is basically almost like a flagellation item. People will like wrap themselves in these spiky things that can like pinch the flesh, or depending on exactly how serious you want to get with this penitential item, I guess. It can just be uncomfortable sometimes. Like, think of a particularly gnarly jumper of sackcloth or hair shirt or something like that you would wear that's uncomfortable and designed to be uncomfortable, to on the more extreme ends like spiked metal chains or bands that can be worn on the thigh or the waist for self-mortification as an act of spiritual discipline, apparently. The easiest example of that one would probably be if anybody has seen that awful movie based on the awfuler Dan Brown books. Dan Brown? I can't remember what his name was. The one's about Rome and the church, and there's people killing people and all that kind of stuff. There's a guy who wears one, an albino monk, because of course. But yeah. So that's what that is too. So that's what the ecclesiastic prisoners have their hands wrapped in, because it's bad enough you have a bomb stuck to you. I asked Tuomas about the nature of some of these trench pilgrims and how off the rails they can go, and he said that basically there's been some of them have gone straight into the realm of heresy as far as the church has concerned. Now, he didn't expand upon that. It's not like Tuomas is just going to sit there and give me every bit of fucking information or whatever. But I would suspect we might see that one developed over the course of the game. At some point, we might learn more about the fate or what became of these groups. It is kind of hilarious and interesting that it echoes what occurred to a group of people in one of my fiction series. So I just thought that was like pretty funny when he said that. I was like, cool. It was the natural extrapolation of how Trench Pilgrim psychology seems to work. You know, that they can go way too far and things might get crazy and they could become susceptible to influence from demons potentially, because who knows, that might happen. One of the things I really liked was the mention of the houses of learning. I asked about that specifically, about how they get the Metacry's flesh, how they get certain chemicals and things like that, and scenarios basically that I put to Tuomas were that they have, I don't want to say spies, but they have people inside who are all playing their own like political chess games, basically, who want certain processions to be strong, perhaps depending on what they're doing in the world or what they feel they're capable of, who might be sympathetic towards their cause for religious purposes, or are just playing a very long political game of their own, will get these items to them sometimes, and that was confirmed as yes, the thing that can happen, and they can just straight up raid them, like straight up steal that shit, which is also very interesting. I guess if you're a Trench Pilgrim and you feel like your spiritual journey is just the one that's most in tune with the Lord, then you're not going to worry too much about anything else. Now, for those who don't know as well, the houses of learning are different to the House of Wisdom. The House of Wisdom is that very specific thing that teaches and explores and experiments with the Taquan arts and alchemy and all that kind of thing. The houses of learning, to my understanding, are more traditional, just schools of teaching, more traditional academia. They would do, not zero, but they would do far less experimentation with dangerous magics that might eat their faces, and a lot more with physics, math, chemistry, things of that nature. That's the way I understand it anyway. Alrighty. So one of the things that came up was a mention of the Cup of the Lord. I found that really interesting because in Corinthians chapter 10 verse 21, it basically just says you cannot drink the Cup of the Lord and the Cup of the demons too. You cannot have a part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons. And basically it was within the lore saying that, like, you know, they've drank so much of the Cup of the Lord. It's just a way of saying, like, they're really kind of into religion, basically. I don't know really how else to phrase it. But I just thought it was a really nice mention of a biblical phrase there. And then the second last thing I want to talk about here is the number 7. I just found it very interesting that after 7 years of service with New Antioch, you can, you know, you've done your tour of duty and you can buy your rifle basically and you can leave. Should you want to. I just figure like the 7 years, there's a pretty obvious biblical and religious referencing of the number 7, which shows up a lot in all kinds of religions. There's within Christianity, obviously, you've got the 7 seals and God creating the world and resting on the 7th day and all that kind of stuff. So that just kind of stood out to me as a fun and interesting reference. The general rule for Trench Crusade lore writing seems to be that if you can make a number referential to anything religious, then that's the way that they're likely to go with it, which I find interesting and fun. And then we have some information on the Caparot, which in the world of Trench Crusade is based around holy geometry from St. Hubert. And I asked, was that St. Hubert of Liege? And yes, it is. It's the St. Hubert of Liege, who is like the patron saint of hunters, which I find very interesting and kind of fun. The idea that these Trench Pilgrims are definitely like hunting their demons, no doubt, is super interesting. But yeah, St. Hubert is some interesting history to him. He was a Frank, he was a Germanic people, basically. And he was a bit of a hoity-toity guy. He was born in 656. So we can assume that that's probably roughly the same in the world of Trench Crusade, that there's not a tremendous amount of difference in the life of St. Hubert. But he was, you know, a royal, for want of a better description. And he married another royal. And they had a son called Floribert, who sounds like a Pokemon name, no offense, Floribert. But unfortunately, Hubert's wife died during birth, as was, you know, potentially always a problem at the time. And his grief kind of drove him out into the woods, and he gave himself up entirely to hunting, according to the wiki article. And whilst he was in this life of being almost entirely dedicated to the act of hunting, he was pursuing a stag. And the animal turned and it had a floating crucifix between its antlers, and Hubert heard a voice tell him, like, you know, if you don't go to Jesus now, you're going to hell, so you figure it out. And that's what he did. He decided to give up his claims to any land and title, and he gave away all his money to the poor, and he went to Maastricht because he had to find this guy called Lambert. Apparently he was told in the vision to seek Lambert, so he had to go find Bishop Lambert, who taught him, basically, who guided him through his spiritual journey, and they ended up becoming a priest, and he kind of took vows of poverty and all this kind of stuff, and he was apparently, like, you know, genuine. He lived a really good life and looked after people, a fantastic speaker, all that kind of stuff, and was made a saint later on. He didn't seem to die in any particular horrible way. The death section just said he died peacefully in a place called Fura, located 30 miles from Liege, in 727 or 728. They can't. I mean, I'm not going to be mad at them for not knowing exactly which one. So yeah, I just think that is really interesting that it was he who came up with the Caparot and the what's called holy geometry I believe the term used is holy geometry. Let me have a quick check. Whose shape and decorations follow the sacred geometry, my bad, devised by Saint Hubert. So that's what he ended up doing in the life of Trench Crusade, which once again is super interesting and fun. And I love when they pull in like a real saint and add some verve to how it was that they lived their life or existed in the game. But anyway, look, I've talked way too much, every time way too much in these goddamn videos. I will let you go. Thank you so much for watching. As always, like the video only if you actually liked the video. If you're new here and you feel like subscribing and hitting the little bell, I ain't gonna stop you. And remember to curate your subfeed, even if that means you're bored of me and you want to get rid of me. That's what you got to do. Use your subscription tab on YouTube. It's where you see the things that you want to see. Thank you so much, guys. Have a wonderful day and all the best.